¿Qué pasó, cochinos and sucias? I'm Gallo, the chivalrous chauvinist. Welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast. Sucias are my favorite. Today's episode, I'm going to share with you the oral history of BDsM, at least as it was related to me. And some of this I've come to my own conclusions based on what I've heard and learned. So this is the oral history that was shared with me from BDsM. So we're going to start off with the silent generation. So I spoke with a lot of old folks back in the early to mid 90s. There was this woman I was hooking up with, and she was like a front desk girl, or I forgot what it was, but she worked at an old folks home. And so she worked the night shift, and I would go over a couple times a week to basically go get some free dinner, especially whenever the food was good. It was in an upscale area of Houston, so the food and the way they took care of the old folks was very nice. Like if I end up in an old folks home, I would want to end up in one like this one. So, in any case, got to have a conversation, or many conversations, with a lot of old folks there. And it was kind of cool because they kind of fussed over me. I was like the grandchild that never came, and some of them were senile and presumed I was their grandchild, and just a lot of interesting conversations. But the ones that stuck out the most was essentially the sex education that the silent generation had, and that is virtually none. The men kind of would figure things out from working in the fields and seeing how Mother Nature works. And they'd also get conversations from other men, so they'd have an idea of what to do. Women, on the other hand, they were kind of kept in the dark completely. It wasn't essentially, if they were lucky, it wasn't until the night before their wedding or the day of their wedding that their mother would have a conversation with them as to kind of what to expect. But still, even then, not in so much detail. The closest thing to detail was essentially take care of your husband, or paraphrasing, keep his balls empty and his belly full, and you never have to worry about anything. The husband's going to take care of you. Inversely, part of that story you'd also hear, or I'd also heard, and was kind of surprised to learn about this, is that husbands would bend their wives over their knee and spank them if they misbehaved. And it could be anything as small as talking back or sassing them to having an argument, whatever. It was just basically anything that was considered misbehavior. And essentially, if you weren't behaving as a Stepford wife, well, then that would be reason or cause to get spanked. This carried on from the 30s and 40s, all the way up until, I want to say, mid 50s. Of course, I didn't talk to older women that were born or married in the 50s. Most of these were married by the 20s to 40s, because then they were having the boomers, and the boomers weren't in old folks' home yet. So in any case, from that, I also heard the men would also talk about Betty Page and other big name porn women, or so to speak. There were stag films and stag photos, which was essentially porn back in the day. And Betty Page gave this twist or allusion to being spanked and spanking. And that was, I presume, a different form of BDsM, or a form of BDsM, making the spanking or correcting the behavior of a wife a little more sensual or more sexual. Although, of course, it was more of a fantasy, not something that you would do with your wife, because that's the mother of your children. That's the woman that takes care of you, so you don't do anything bad with her. She's a Madonna, and she is just for procreation. She's not for fun. That's where you have women on the side. Now, fast forward about 15 years, mid 50s. So my mentor in BDsM, I met him in the 90s. He met his mentor in the 70s. And his mentor, my mentor's mentor, Mr. J, he was around for, damn it, can't remember the name of it. It was the predecessor to Folsom Street Fair, which takes place in San Francisco. And Mr. J was a gay man. He got out of the Navy, or got kicked out of the Navy, and hung out or stayed around in San Francisco and was a part of the community there. I don't know how big of a member he was as far as anything goes with either, I want to say it's CMC, California Motorcycle Club. It was essentially formed from emulating Marlon Brando's character in The Wild Ones. That's where we get leather daddies. And to be clear, this doesn't mean that all gays in the San Francisco area, especially back in the 50s, if you were in the leather community, you were more than likely gay. But if you were gay, doesn't mean you were part of the leather community. In any case, Mr. J was in and around that scene from, I want to say it was 57, could have been 58. Don't remember the time frame because it's been, 25-ish years since I'd heard these stories, and a lot has happened between now and then. In any case, so Mr. J was in the community back then, and he was a gay man, and he had shared with my mentor that he hated gays. He hated being gay, and it was a lot of self-hate, essentially. And in the community, the S&M part of BDsM, at least the sadomasochism part, not the submissive part, but the sadomasochism part of the leather community, there were some very aggressive leather daddies and we would call them pain sluts now. The subs that would like to receive pain a few of them had shared with Mr. J that they loved to get beat because that seems for them like a form of contrition, because they were Catholics, they were raised Catholic, and the self-hate, self-guilt, all that kind of came together because being gay is wrong. And for them, getting beaten, in some cases within an inch of their life, made them feel like, okay, now I can be gay because I have been punished for it. The Doms, the leather daddies, and again, this isn't all of them. These are just a few instances that is hearsay and shared with me. Mr. J, he enjoyed beating on them. He despised flaming gays, flamboyant, effeminate gay men, despised them. His take was something along the lines of that if you're going to do something wrong, you need to do it where no one knows about it. And the effeminate men kind of couldn't hide their gayness, so to speak. So, especially back then, there was no such thing as hate crimes. So if you were lynched, if you were mugged, stabbed, murdered, whatever, you were not even considered a statistic. It was just, oh, he fell on a knife a couple dozen times. That would be the take that police reports would do. It was literally that they fell onto a knife or they ran into a wall. And that would be even if they bothered to make a police report on the thing. Otherwise, they were just treated as less than human, similar to the way Indigenous and Black people were treated. Although, if I recall, the take, or at least what was shared with my mentor, is that gays were seen as even less than because they being the police and society, thought it was a choice that they would choose to be gay. You know, there's not the black man's fault or an Indian's or a Spic's fault for being who they are. They were born that way. But gay men choose to be gay. Gay men choose to be with other men. They don't conform to society. So it's a big deal that the Miracle Mile in San Francisco even existed back then, and that we got the Folsom Street Fair, which is more of a conglomeration of kink, of fetishes that kind of just gets shown off once a year. In any case, so the whole protocol stuff of BDsM, or a lot of the protocol stuff that we get from BDsM, particularly the discipline, sadomasochism part, we learned or have now because of leather daddies. That's not to say that without them, we wouldn't have it. It would still probably exist. After all, there is evidence that kink and BDsM has existed since Egyptian times. I just think that the way that we have it now is in large part thanks to the leather daddies and the gay community that were willing to take a stand and be themselves back in the 50s and 60s. Now, my mentor, he picked it up by starting to go into Folsom Street Fair in the 70s. I don't recall how he got involved or how he found out about it, but his first Folsom Street Fair was in 76 for the bicentennial. So That's why it kind of sticks out for me, for him to remember that. And so, thanks to Folsom Street Fair and the intermingling of just cultures and gays being open to straights and heteros coming in and being a part of this community and being willing to teach them and have what we have now. Some of you might say, well, this is all hearsay. Who knows if any of this is true? I get that. But part of the fabric that makes us human is an oral history. We've had this for millennia. And a lot of the great stories that we have today were or began as oral histories being passed down from generation to generation. Freemasons in particular, all of their history is passed down orally. There is nothing written down that can talk about or shares what goes on behind closed doors. To take that a step further, we also have the Iliad and the Odyssey. But that is kind of fantastical, so who knows how much truth in there and how much has been embellished. But another oral history that we have is the Quran. Hopefully, this has been educational for you. Any case, thanks for listening. If you think someone should hear about this, do us both a favor. Share it with them. If you like this or learn something from it, go ahead and rate this episode. Thanks for listening. I love you. You are worthy of it. Till next time, besos.